Hi everyone, I'm Geetha Shantha Ram from the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. And today I have a very exciting guest. We're going to talk about dyslexia and obviously the things that matter when it comes to dyslexia. And I met this incredible lady quite coincidentally on a trip back home from Australia. And so let me introduce you to Miss Gabrielle Harris. Gabrielle, if you could maybe share with us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do, that would be a great way to start.
Thanks, Geetha, and thanks for having me. It's a really exciting topic to talk about. And to give you a bit of context about me and who I am, I am a CEO. I'm a mother of three boys, and I'm also dyslexic. So I am looking forward to having this conversation with you today and sharing a little bit about my experience.
Well, thank you again for taking the time to do this. You mentioned that you're a mother of three boys. I am a mother of two kids, one girl, one boy. And my daughter, the younger of the two, is dyslexic and has visual processing disorder. And we know dyslexia runs in the family. So I'm just wondering, have you spotted anything? Have you noticed anything with your children?
I was really surprised with my eldest son because my mother's dyslexic and many of her siblings are. My brother's dyslexic, and so I was anticipating that my children would also be. But my older two boys were not, which actually surprised me. But certainly my youngest is, yes. So it's Skip hit the third, and he will be better off for it.
Oh, yes, especially with, you being the mother and being able to guide him through based on your own experiences. Maybe if you could share with us your personal journey with dyslexia, maybe growing up, how that made you feel. When were you diagnosed? I mean, those are questions I have.
Yeah, so through school, I found, I guess, the standard traditional learning model actually really quite challenging. I used to have an absolute fear and terror of having to read in front of the class. And that was a very common thing, particularly in the Australian education system, that you would just be called on by the teacher and put in this position of total embarrassment and shame when you couldn't actually thread the words together and things were jumping around the page in front of your eyes. And I think it had a really big impact on my confidence in so many ways, but particularly in presenting and being in front of people because I had so much shame wrapped up in my failure to do that well in primary school and all the way through high school. I found that even in exams, I just absolutely failed them because I just couldn't actually even get the grasp of the question. It's not that I didn't know how to answer it, but just the small words being in the wrong spot in my head. I'd actually write an entire response to a question, and having read the question wrong, I've then actually written the answer correctly for the way I've read the question, but I haven't read the question correctly. And I'd always run out of time because I needed more time to think about these things. I remember my teacher in year 9 just stating it as a fact. She's just said, "You're dyslexic." I was like, "No, I'm not." And she never really mentioned it again, but it sort of stuck in my head. But I was never diagnosed properly for it in high school. And it wasn't actually until I was in my first year of uni, which, by the way, it was a miracle that I even got in. I think I got in on a third round offer. And what my tutor said, "Have you been to the support function to ask them to do some testing for your dyslexia?" I hadn't said anything to them, but the tutor just happened to recognize it and pick it up. He said, "You should go because you'll get longer time to complete assignments and to do your exams." So, yeah, I was 18 before anybody had actually diagnosed me for dyslexia.
And I mean, so that brings me to another question. When we talk about early intervention and early identification, the impact really is to self-esteem and maybe how you would consider yourself as a learner, how you would advocate for yourself. And I was wondering, do you think being diagnosed at 18 and going through that process of not really knowing why you were struggling in some areas, do you think that late diagnosis helped you? Or do you think it kind of set you back in, like the traumatic experiences you might have had in school when you were younger?
Well, you just never do know that kind of fork in the road, do you? Because your experience is just your experience. On one hand, I would say, "Oh, if only I was diagnosed younger, I would never have internalized a belief that I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
Mm, And probably, I think probably that would be true. But I guess the other side of it is I found outlets in other ways. I became very honed in my ability to build relationships and influence and engage verbally and with interpersonal connection. And that has become my super strength. So I don't really begrudge my journey. I think it was what it was and it's made me who I am. And I'm grateful for that. So, yeah, look, I probably don't have a fixed view on that. I think now with my own son, I'm glad that we've gone down the path of early intervention simply so he's got more support and that I have a language that allows him to not feel any shame around that. In my family, my mother was never diagnosed, and it wasn't until myself and my brother were that we were like, "Mum, you're actually dyslexic." She's like, "No, I'm not." "Yeah, you are." So I think in my upbringing, it just wasn't something that was I don't know, I just don't think it was considered or accepted then.
And it also speaks to the way the systems were when we were younger. And I'm sort of assuming we're about the same age, although you may be much younger than me. But um,
Not.
acceptance or even sensitivity to learning difficulties like dyslexia or learning differences, I think is a lot more prevalent now than it was before. And hence you have, teachers calling on you when you're not prepared to answer or making you stand up and read. And my daughter would share with me her moments of terror when, they expected to read passages. And so she would start to count. Okay, so which passage am I going to read or which paragraph am I going to read? And she'll start practicing. So she's not listening to anyone else. She's just trying to decode and practice that so that she can put up a flawless performance. But now we know that this is a less ideal way of encouraging our young to participate in the classroom by, calling them on the spot. And so, you shared something very interesting as well in the context of how dyslexia enabled strengths to surface and how you therefore groomed those strengths and it's become a superpower. Many people say that dyslexia is a gift because they say that as a result of this, you find an area that you can excel in and it sort of crafts that journey for you. So, would you agree, therefore, that it was the experience you had coping with dyslexia in a situation that was perhaps less flexible that actually allowed you to find your area of talent and strength?
Yeah, 100%. There's no denying that to have got to where I have got to as the CEO of a management consulting firm that's very successful, that that would have occurred if I hadn't had the experiences that I had with dyslexia growing up. Um, I know not all of that was positive, and I still today do some work with a psychologist or even with friends unpacking some of the trauma that was associated with the experiences I had as a result of not being able to learn in the same way as others. But even with all of that, I'd still take it time and time again. I just know that it is the one thing that um, I've really been able to maximize is that tool of forming really strong relationships and connections with people as a way of offsetting some of the things that I perhaps can't do as well as what some other neurotypical people in non-dyslexic worlds can do.
Yeah. And that's really the message about teamwork and organizations of the future, right? It's about finding the right fit within the team and capitalizing on our strengths. And so, what you've said really is, I suppose, the message that we would like to send to all workplaces in terms of trying to find not so much a perfect candidate that checks all the boxes, but rather to find candidates who come in with strengths and form the best team possible. And I'm glad that you said that because I think in Singapore and in the world, we're talking about workplace inclusion and we're talking about the employability of individuals with learning differences. And we really do need to shift our perspectives on that. And as recruiters, we do need to think about how everyone's got an ideal spot and a part to play in that collaborative work. When you were talking about having to read in front of everyone, it suddenly occurred to me in our conversations with the parents, and maybe even from personal experience, I can share a lot of young people who are not aware that they've got a learning difficulty or difference yet. And they're tasked to do things and expected to do things the same way as everyone else is able to. They sometimes get bullied. So this phrase about this idea of being bullied by not just the peers, but even the caregivers sometimes, because there's a lack of understanding. I was just wondering, was that an experience that you had growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I really remember quite distinctly. I must have been in grade 4 or 5, where there was a group of girls in my year level that would at lunchtime spend their entire time telling me how stupid I was because I couldn't even read simple words from a book. Um, and it was a really lonely and sad experience, actually. I think children really try to manage their own anxieties by projecting the stuff that worries and concerns them onto others. So, in hindsight, they were just little kids trying to find their own way, making themselves feel comfortable by getting rid of the stuff that's making them feel uncomfortable and putting it onto somebody else. And that is what the heart of bullying is about. But, working in the space of management consulting, all of the work that we do is in organizational change. It looks at dysfunction in organizations, which is just a system of a collective of people. Doesn't matter how old people are, they still embody, sadly, some of those same traits of trying to get rid of their own anxieties by bullying others. So, for people of any form of difference in any way, they're likely at some point in their life to experience that. Mm, I think the great thing about having experienced a form of bullying is the level of empathy and understanding you can have for others. So, as much as it hurts at the time, my encouragement for anybody that goes through something hellish like that is to recognize it's absolutely not about you. It's about the other person and their own fears. It doesn't take away the pain, but it's not about you. And the other piece is convert it for yourself as recognizing why you wouldn't ever want to do that to another. And that empathy, when you can really bottle it for yourself, it pays off time and time again in so many different settings with friendship, in business, even in raising your own children when that happens, if that happens for you. It's a really integral life skill. People that haven't had those experiences tend not to have empathy in spades, which is a deficit later in life.
I love how you talked about empathy. And I do believe what you've said is about taking control of the situation, not allowing the other person to dictate how you see yourself. And you're right, the pain exists. I mean, it's not denying that pain, it's almost acknowledging it, but then converting it into something positive. And from your experience, what you're saying is that led you to feel greater empathy and be able to express that as we become adults and have greater control over the situations that are in front of us. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I mean, we're talking about dyslexia, and you're highly successful where you are right now. And being this person that you are, if you could look back at your younger self, what advice would you give that younger self? And what would be the one thing you'd like her, the young Gabrielle, to take to heart?
I think the advice that I would give to my younger self would be it's all going to be okay. And what you are experiencing now is going to help you later.
Thank you. And I mean, I think it's important that we understand and I would say you're a successful individual with dyslexia. And in many of the things that you've said really is that it's not despite having dyslexia, but almost because of dyslexia that you've achieved these things in your life. And so what are your goals moving forward? What plans do you have?
Well, one of my goals at the moment is because of the historic belief set that I had about being stupid. Education, higher education really felt like it was out of reach for me. So here I am at, 45 years old, and I'm then off to do my master's as the beginning of doing a doctorate. So part of what I really think is a confronting and challenging goal for me is to reset that belief system by taking my education as far as I can take it, regardless of what people have told me about my abilities. So that's exciting, and it's really just a personal self-challenge. Nobody else really cares. It's just me that wants to do it. Of course, I make my life complicated because it's no easy feat to study at the same time as running a business. But, I've never shied away from going big, so I'm doing that. Also, I think there's a huge opportunity, or a goal for me is I'm constantly seeking diversity as I continue to grow the organization. The wonderful people I meet, by being open-minded about who might come through that door and not be fixed on what their background must look like, means that we end up with a more and more thought-provoking, innovative organization. Um, so I'm really keen, and I think this is something that anybody that's sort of in this space now, just recognizing their different abilities. I don't think dyslexia is in any way a disability. I think it's a different ability. Now's your time. Like, this is an exciting time. This is a time where employers are going, I want people that think like that. I want to find the individuals that have had life experience that is going to be valuable in taking the business forward. Um, yeah, so those are my goals, are to continue to find really intelligent, curious, empathetic, and wonderful people who've had different life experiences that they can bring to add value to business and society.
That's a wonderful goal. I mean, it's amazing that with you championing this cause, I hope more employers will see the value in just not looking at the background, not finding out what they scored in their primary or their secondary education, but rather look at what they bring to the table at that moment. And it reminds me of something a professor once said when they were recruiting in individuals for a master's program. At one point, they were looking purely at their academic qualifications. And they decided to do this little experiment, and they opened it up such that based on the interview process alone, they will determine if you're a right fit for that particular program. And they discovered that the scores that these individuals were bringing to the overall program were way higher than when they were looking purely at, say, the academic scores of these individuals. So you're absolutely right. I mean, with artificial intelligence, AI, and the advent of technology, we really don't have a reason to say no to our big picture thinkers, our very creative individuals who have found enterprising ways to work around what may have been initial struggles in their life. So thank you very much, Gabrielle, for having this conversation with me. I think your thoughts will inspire a lot of people. And I hope that parents, as well as individuals with learning differences like dyslexia, hear what you have to say, and let's just march forward, because the future does look bright for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Geetha. It was lovely chatting.
Thank you.